Imagine, um, imagine you are standing in complete suffocating darkness.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It is midnight, April 14th, 1912. You are right in the middle of the North Atlantic, and the cold is just, it's absolute.
Right. It's that deep, biting cold.
Exactly. The air is so unimaginably frigid that every single inhalation feels like, like you are pulling shards of broken glass into your lungs.
God, that's horrifying.
It really is. And you step to the rail of your ship and you look down, expecting to see the familiar churn of the ocean, right? But the water isn't moving.
That's totally still.
Eerily, impossibly flat.
Yeah.
It reflects nothing at all. It just looks like this solid sheet of black obsidian glass stretching out into the void.
Because of the ice.
Yes, you are not sailing through this water. You are trapped in it. Your massive steamship is completely stopped, boxed in by this lethal, silent field of pack ice.
And you're just stuck there.
Entirely alone in this freezing void, listening to the agonizing silence of the deep ocean. But then you lift your eyes from the ice and look out toward the horizon. And there, just a few miles away, through the pitch black, you see them. Strange, bright flashes, sudden bursts of illumination, white rockets silently exploding in the night sky over another ship.
Man, it is just the ultimate haunting image of isolation and impending doom. I mean, you are standing on a stable, safe deck, watching a disaster unfold in agonizingly slow motion across this chasm of deadly, impassable ice.
That's a nightmare.
It really is. You are witnessing the frantic death throes of thousands of people, illuminated only by the brief, ghostly flashes of those distress flares.
And you do nothing. You just watch.
Yeah. That's the crazy part.
It's insane. So today we are doing a deep dive into the SS Californian, which is a vessel known to history by this really chilling moniker, the silent spectator of the Titanic disaster.
Such a heavy title.
It is. But this is not going to be some sterile recounting of facts or like a simple timeline of who sent what message.
No, we're getting into the dark stuff.
Right. We are stepping into a real-life maritime horror story. We're going to completely deconstruct the environmental terror of that freezing night, the bizarre psychological paralysis that gripped an entire crew of experienced sailors, and, the cascading, almost unbelievable series of fatal choices that turned a standard cargo ship into a haunted observer of one of history's greatest tragedies.
And it is so crucial to establish the ground rules of this deep dive right from the start.
Yeah, please do.
The true horror here is not supernatural at all.
Yeah.
Every single detail we're going to explore is a documented historical fact drawn from the official inquiry transcripts, the crew's own sworn testimonies, and modern scientific reappraisals.
So no ghost stories, just terrifying reality.
Exactly. I mean, the environment that night was certainly anomalous, like perhaps uniquely hostile in recorded maritime history, but the profound failures were entirely human.
Yeah, human error is always the scariest part. So we have to understand the physical and psychological environment of the SS Californian before she ever reached that ice field.
Right. Where did she even come from?
Exactly. We need to look at the very nature of her existence. So the Californian was built in 1901 by the Caledon Shipbuilding and Engineering Company in Dundee, Scotland.
Okay.
And for that specific time and place, she was a true Leviathan. She was 447 feet long, weighing in at over 6,200 tons.
And just to put that into the context of turn-of-the-century Dundee, she was a monumental achievement of industrial engineering. I mean, she was the largest ship ever built in that city up to that point.
Wow.
This immense size, it was a double-edged sword. Practically speaking, she pushed the absolute limits of local infrastructure. Like, she was built to the maximum physical dimensions allowed just to moor and outfit her at the Dundee docks.
Just to physically fit her in there.
Yeah. And this wasn't some sleek luxury liner built for the comfort of the transatlantic elite. She was a working ship, a heavy cargo liner built for the Leyland Line, which, was eventually absorbed by J.P. Morgan's massive international mercantile marine company.
Right, so she was there to do a job.
Exactly. Her main job was hauling raw cotton across the ocean.
Yeah.
Though she did have limited berths for about 47 passengers.
But the construction of this ship, it really reads like a Gothic novel.
Oh, totally.
There are these highly disruptive, almost ill-omened events that take place before she even touches the water. It's as if the sheer mass of this vessel was rejecting the city that built it.
Yeah, it was fighting back.
Right. Take the installation of her boilers, for instance. We aren't talking about modern engines.
Right.
These were massive, double-ended steam boilers just terrifyingly heavy metal behemoths.
Oh, yeah.
The shipyard had to move them from the foundry to the hull, and it was an absolute disaster.
You really have to picture the sheer brute force required in 1901. I mean, a motorized heavy transport just didn't exist in a way that could handle this load.
So how did they move them?
They had to drag these immense iron cylinders through the narrow streets of Dundee on a giant wheeled bogie. And the physics of that much concentrated weight rolling over a dirty infrastructure was just catastrophic.
Oh, man.
The sheer mass of these boilers literally crushed the city's cobblestone roads to dust. It was so heavy that the pressure transferred deep into the earth and shattered the underground water pipes, completely flooding the streets they were trying to navigate.
Wait, really? It just broke the town?
It broke the town. It completely overwhelmed the physical environment. She was tearing up the city before she was even a completed ship.
That is insane. And the disruption didn't stop at the plumbing either.
Nope.
Later, when they were outfitting the ship, a crane was lifting this massive wooden spar to rig one of the Californian's 4 masts. The equipment swung totally out of control, became tangled in the local telephone wires, and violently severed them.
Wow.
Yeah. They completely cut off communication in the surrounding area.
She was literally a machine of brute force, just imposing herself on the environment.
And honestly, that disruption of communication is an incredibly dark piece of foreshadowing.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was thinking. It's like the ship was born breaking connections.
Yeah.
You know, foreshadowing the ultimate broken connection that would define her legacy. That's a great way to put it. But, you know, a ship is only a machine. We really have to look at the human element running that machine.
Right, the crew.
Exactly. So by 1911, the ship is under the command of Captain Stanley Lord. And if we want to understand the paralysis of the crew later on, we must understand the social structure of an Edwardian cargo vessel.
Which was pretty intense, right?
Very. It was an incredibly rigid, almost feudal hierarchy. You had 55 crew members in total. The officers, who navigated the ship, lived in the superstructure. They had this nice oak-paneled smoking room, electric lights, decent dining facilities.
That's pretty comfortable.
It was. But the vast majority of the crew, the men actually running the ship, they lived in an entirely different world below the foredeck.
Yeah, the stokers who shoveled the coal, the trimmers who moved it, the able seamen.
Right.
We are talking about men sleeping in incredibly cramped, poorly ventilated, poorly lit cabins, packed 4 to 8 people in a single room.
Just claustrophobic.
Totally. The smell of sweat, sea salt, and coal dust would have been permanent. It was a life of grueling physical labor in the freezing cold on deck or the blistering heat of the boiler rooms.
And it is a harsh, exhausting existence that breeds a very specific type of culture. It enforces unquestioning obedience to the chain of command. In 1912, the captain is absolute god aboard his vessel.
And Captain Lord was known to be pretty intense, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He was known as a strict disciplinarian. You do not speak out of turn, you do not question your superiors, and you certainly do not wake the captain of the ship unless you are absolutely, unequivocally certain that you need to.
That fear.
Yes. That strict, isolating hierarchy, that deep-seated fear of overstepping bounds is the psychological groundwork for everything that happens in the ice field.
Wow. Okay, so let's follow them out into that ice field.
Let's do it.
The Californian leaves Liverpool on April 5, 1912, heading for Boston. On this particular voyage, she is carrying 0 passengers.
Right, just cargo.
Just those 55 men, a belly full of cargo, and the vast Atlantic. The first week is standard, totally uneventful sailing. But then we hit the evening of Sunday, April 14th, and the environment turns actively hostile.
And the North Atlantic, in that specific region, was experiencing a highly unusual, massive accumulation of pack ice and large icebergs, which were being pushed south by the Labrador Current.
So it wasn't normal for that time of year?
No, it wasn't just a few chunks of ice here and there. It was a sprawling, impenetrable field.
The creeping dread of sailing into this must have been just palpable. You are pushing through the dark, and the water is getting thicker. By 10:20 p.m. ship's time, the Californian is physically trapped.
Stuck.
Captain Lord realizes they cannot go any further safely. They are surrounded by a vast, silent expanse of ice. So he makes what is, in a vacuum, the most prudent, safe decision a captain can make.
He stops the ship.
He orders the vessel to halt for the night. They stop the engines. The constant thrumming vibration of the ship just dies away, and they are left waiting in the profound silence of the freezing ocean.
Which is, frankly, exactly what a responsible commander should do to protect his ship and his crew.
Yeah, you can't blame him for that.
No. But this is where the timeline intersects with the Titanic, and we get into this horrifying symphony of missed connections. To really understand this, we have to go into the Californian's wireless room.
The radio room.
Right. The ship had recently been retrofitted with a Marconi wireless apparatus. The radio operator is a young man named Cyril Evans. And earlier that evening, around 6:30 p.m., Evans had successfully transmitted a warning to another ship, the Antillean, about 3 large icebergs to the south.
And didn't the Titanic hear that?
Yes. The Titanic's operator, Harold Bride, actually intercepted this warning and delivered it straight to the Titanic's bridge.
Okay, but the pivotal tragic interaction happens later that night. The Californian is stopped. Captain Lord tells Evans to send out a general warning to all the ships in the area that they are surrounded by ice and halted for the night. So Evans keys up his transmitter. And because the Titanic is steaming at high speed and is now incredibly close to the Californian, the signal Evans sends is essentially a localized sonic boom in the earpiece of the Titanic's senior radio operator, Jack Phillips.
And to really grasp the horror of this moment, we must abandon our modern understanding of radio.
Yeah, it wasn't like tuning into a podcast.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Early Marconi wireless technology did not have clean, separate frequency bands where you could just tune to FM 98.1 and ignore FM 101.5. They used spark gap transmitters.
Spurt gap? That sounds aggressive.
It was. When Evans pressed his telegraph key, he was literally generating a high-voltage electrical spark across a gap. It was raw, unrefined electromagnetic noise, broadcast in broadband static.
Wow.
And the volume of the signal in the receiving operator's headphones was entirely dictated by the physical proximity of the transmitting ship.
So it wasn't like a polite voice coming over a speaker. If Evans is right next door, he's practically screaming a blast of static directly into Phillips's ear.
Precisely. And you have to picture the environment Phillips is in on the Titanic at that exact moment. He is not sitting in a serene, quiet room. He is under immense, exhausting stress.
Because of the passengers.
Yes. The Titanic was carrying some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they were treating the Marconi wireless like a new toy. Phillips is sweating through a massive backlog of mundane passenger messages like greetings, stock trays, early text messages, essentially.
It's a noise.
Right, and he's trying to beam them to the wireless station at Cape Race, Newfoundland, which is 800 miles away. So he's pressing his headphones tight to his ears, listening intently for this faint, distant whisper through the crackle of atmospheric static.
And then boom!
And suddenly Evans blasts him with the closest, loudest, most aggressive signal possible.
It physically hurts him.
It does.
And Phillips famously snaps. He taps back in Morse code using the DDD code, which is a formal signal to stop transmitting. He says, "Keep out, I am working Cape Race." He basically tells his coworker, "Shut up, you are deafening me, I'm busy."
It is a sharp rebuke, but I mean, we have to view it through the lens of their profession.
Yeah.
Evans wasn't deeply insulted or emotionally devastated by this.
He didn't take it personally.
No, he was a professional. He understood Phillips was working heavy traffic with Cape Race. Evans listened for a few more minutes to see if there was anything else, and then following standard protocol, because he was the sole operator on the Californian and had been awake and working since early that morning, he switched off the power to his set.
He took off his headphones.
Yep, he went to bed. It was 11:35 p.m.
I want to dwell on the sheer mundane nature of this interaction.
It really is.
It is just an exhausted, overworked guy telling another coworker to keep it down so he can finish his shift and clear his desk. It's an interaction that has happened a million times in offices across the world.
Yeah, totally normal.
But here, the butterfly effect is just staggering. Does the sheer mundane nature of this interaction make the resulting loss of 1,500 lives infinitely more horrifying? That mundane annoyance directly contributes to it.
It does. It highlights the ultimate terrifying vulnerability of human systems. Proximity, the very thing that should have been their absolute salvation. The fact that a rescue ship was sitting right next door in the ice is the exact technical reason why communication was severed.
Because they were too close.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Californian signal was too loud, too disruptive, precisely because they were close enough to save everyone.
The moment Evans turns that dial and cuts the power, the radio goes dead. The Californian is now effectively deaf to the outside world.
Blind and deaf.
Well, the only way they can perceive anything beyond their frozen trap is with their own eyes. Evans goes to sleep at 11:35 p.m., 5 minutes later, at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic's hull tears open against the submerged spur of an iceberg.
And we enter the midnight watch. This is the sequence of events that elevates this from a tragedy of bad timing into a deeply unsettling psychological horror story on the bridge of the Californian.
Right. Let's lay out the minute-by-minute timeline of this paralysis.
Yeah.
The first sighting actually happens before the collision. At 11:10 p.m., the third officer, a man named Charles Groves, is peering out into the blackness and sees the lights of a ship come into view on the horizon, maybe 10 to 12 miles away.
Okay.
He recognizes it's not a small freighter. He goes down to the chart room and tells Captain Lord. Lord asks if he can raise them. He tells Groves to try contacting the ship with the Morse lamp. So Groves goes back up and starts flashing this powerful electric lamp. Nothing. He gets no reply.
And Groves notices something highly specific about the distant ship. He testifies later that he could tell it was a large passenger liner because it had multiple decks that were brilliantly lit.
Like a floating hotel.
Exactly, a floating palace of light in the dark.
Ugh.
But then, right around 11:40 p.m., which we now know is the exact minute the Titanic strikes the ice and the engineers stop her massive engines, Groves notes that this distant, brilliantly lit ship appears to halt in the water.
And the lights.
A large portion of its deck lights seem to vanish or dim.
But Groves doesn't panic. He assumes the ship simply turned its hull, hiding the lights from his perspective. He doesn't realize he's watching a dying Leviathan bleeding power.
Right.
At midnight, the watch changes. The second officer, Herbert Stone, takes over the bridge. He's joined by a young apprentice named James Gibson, and for the next hour, they stand in the freezing dark, just watching this distant, dark ship sitting motionless in the ice.
Just watching.
Then Gibson spots something that changes everything. He tells Stone he's seen rockets.
And Stone observes them as well. White rockets shooting up into the dark sky above the mystery ship, bursting with a flash of light. Gibson explicitly says to Stone, a ship is not going to fire rockets at sea for nothing.
They know.
Yes, they are recognizing out loud that this is anomalous behavior.
This is where the terror of their inaction really sets in for me. Stone is looking through his binoculars, and he notes that the ship looks wrong. He says, she looks very queer out of the water. Her lights look queer.
He literally says queer.
Yeah, and Gibson, this young apprentice, agrees. He says, everything was not all right with her. They literally conclude aloud to each other on a freezing deck in the middle of the ocean that they are watching a ship in distress.
And yet, look at the physical actions they take in response to that realization. Stone uses the speaking tube to report the rockets down to Captain Lord, who is resting in the chart room below the bridge.
And what does Lord say?
Captain Lord, awakened from his rest, asks a single, incredibly dismissive question. He says, are they company signals?
What does that even mean in this context? Company signals. Like a ship is just throwing a fireworks show to say, hey, we're the White Star Line, just passing through.
Well, in the Edwardian maritime world, ships sometimes use colored flares at night to identify themselves to other ships of the same shipping line.
Yeah.
But distress rockets were universally understood. They were white, and they detonated with a loud bang high in the air.
It's pretty unmistakable.
Very. So Stone tells Lord he doesn't know if they are company signals. He just knows they are white rockets. So Lord simply tells him to keep trying to signal them with the Morse lamp.
That's it.
That's it. Let me be clear about what doesn't happen here. Lord never gets out of bed. He never comes out onto the freezing deck to look for himself.
Unbelievable.
And crucially, horribly, he never orders his officers to go down the hall, wake up Cyril Evans, and turn the Marconi radio back on to listen for a distress call.
We really have to stop and analyze the psychology of the bridge crew in this moment. How do experienced sailors look at a ship that is sitting weirdly in the water? A ship they themselves describe as looking queer, firing multiple white explosive rockets into the sky, state out loud that the ship must be in trouble, and then
do nothing.
Do absolutely nothing to intervene. Why does Stone not just abandon the speaking tube, run down the hall, and shake the radio operator awake?
You were looking at a textbook, fatal case of cognitive dissonance mixed with toxic hierarchy.
Okay, unpack that.
Well, they are processing visual data that fundamentally shatters their reality. The idea that a massive, unsinkable passenger liner could be sinking in the middle of a dead calm sea on a clear night is almost incomprehensible to their minds.
It just doesn't compute.
Exactly. So their brains scramble to find a less terrifying, more mundane explanation. Maybe they're just company signals. Maybe they're just navigating the ice.
Right.
But the rigid hierarchy is the real killer here. Junior officers in 1912 were terrified of their captains. As we discussed, Captain Lord was an absolute authoritarian. Stone and Gibson likely feared the immediate tangible wrath of waking a sleeping Captain Lord with an unconfirmed, confusing report far more than they feared for the abstract lives of unknown people in a distant ship.
I want you, the listener, to really put yourself on that wooden deck for a moment. Your breath is misting thickly in the freezing air. You're staring into the pitch black, watching these silent, ghostly explosions in the sky.
Just terrifying.
Your gut is screaming at you that something is horribly wrong. Instinctively, that people might be dying in the freezing water just a few miles away. But your commanding officer, the man who controls your entire livelihood and career, essentially rolls over and goes back to sleep.
Yeah.
How do you process that paralysis? You are trapped between the horror of what you are seeing and the horror of insubordination. It's a waking nightmare. By 2 a.m., Stone and Gibson have watched 8 rockets launch into the sky.
8 of them.
And then, around 2:20 a.m., the ship simply disappears from the horizon entirely.
Because of their cognitive dissonance, Stone and Gibson assumed the ships simply powered up and steamed away into the dark, leaving the area.
They thought it just left.
Yeah, they don't realize that 2:20 a.m. is the exact minute the Titanic's stern rose into the air, the ship broke apart, and slipped completely beneath the surface of the Atlantic.
God.
The crew of the Californian is left completely alone in the dark, staring at an empty horizon, completely unaware that an invisible graveyard of 1,500 souls is now floating just a few miles away.
But the sun has to rise eventually. And when dawn breaks, the horrific realization washes over the Californian. The timeline picks back up around 3:40 a.m. Stone and Gibson are still on watch, likely freezing and exhausted.
Yeah.
Suddenly, they see new rockets. But these rockets aren't coming from the east where the mystery ship was. These are coming from the south.
And they don't know it yet, but these new rockets are being fired by the RMS Carpathia, which had intercepted the Titanic's distress call and is currently steaming at breakneck speed, pushing its engines past the red line, trying to reach the Titanic's last known coordinates to mount a rescue.
Wow. At 4:30 a.m., Captain Lord finally wakes up and comes out onto the deck. His primary concern is figuring out how to navigate the Californian out of the ice field.
Right, he's just doing his job.
He sees the strange situation and sends his chief officer, George Stewart, to go wake up the radio operator, Evans, to find out what all these rockets during the night were about. Right. Evans wakes up, bleary-eyed, flips the power switch on his Marconi set, puts the heavy headphones over his ears, and immediately the airwaves are screaming with frantic traffic. He listens for a moment, and the German ship Frankfurt relays the catastrophic truth directly to him.
The Titanic sank overnight.
Exactly.
The psychological impact of that message hitting the bridge of the Californian must have been sickening.
Yeah.
I mean, the cognitive dissonance shatters in an instant. The mental wall they built just crumbles.
It wasn't a trick of the light.
Right. All those career lights, the 8 white rockets, the ship suddenly disappearing from the horizon. It wasn't a ship steaming away, it was a ship slipping beneath the waves.
So the Californian finally gets underway, but it is this agonizingly slow, tortured process. They can't just sprint to the rescue.
Because of the ice.
Yeah, they have to carefully pick their way westward through the dense pack ice, then turn south, trying to reach the coordinates Evans gives them. They don't arrive on the scene until 8:30 in the morning.
And what they find when they arrive is the aftermath of an apocalypse.
It is an incredibly grim scene. When the Californian arrives, the Carpathia is already there, just finishing the grueling work of hauling the last of the freezing, traumatized survivors out of the lifeboats.
Yeah.
The Carpathia essentially signals the Californian, we have everyone who is alive, we are full, we are leaving for New York immediately, you search the area. And so the Carpathia turns and steams away, leaving the Californian alone to slowly patrol the wreck site in the bright morning light.
And the visual details of that morning patrol are haunting. The sea was still dead calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror. And scattered across this vast glassy surface was the shattered detritus of a floating city.
It's just devastating to picture.
They sailed past to smashed deck chairs, chunks of cork from lifebelts, splintered pieces of white-painted wood, and drifting aimlessly among the wreckage were the empty, abandoned lifeboats that the Carpathia had left behind.
But the worst part, the absolute worst part, were the bodies. The Californian was sailing through a sea of the dead.
Hundreds of them.
Hundreds of frozen corpses, suspended upright in their white cork lifebelts, bobbing silently in the icy water. Just imagine the profound, soul-crushing guilt of standing on the deck of the Californian in the bright morning light, looking down at these frozen mothers, fathers, and children.
Awful.
Absolutely knowing in your bones that just a few hours earlier, you were watching their desperate, explosive pleas for help, from a warm, safe distance.
It is a moral injury of the highest order. They were close enough to see the rockets clearly, but they chose to do nothing.
If they had just tried.
Exactly. If they had acted immediately, if Lord had ordered the engines started and pushed aggressively through the ice, they might have arrived before the Titanic actually went under. At the very least, they could have pulled hundreds of people from the freezing water before hypothermia stopped their hearts.
And that trauma, that immense suffocating guilt, it doesn't just stay buried at sea. The Californian eventually continues its voyage and arrives in Boston on April 19th. Initially, they are entirely unnoticed.
Right. Everyone's looking at the Carpathia.
The whole world, the entire global press corps, is focused on the Carpathia arriving in New York with the survivors. But the silence on the Californian breaks very quickly.
The lower-ranking crew members simply couldn't live with the secret. The psychological pressure of what they saw and what they didn't do was just too immense.
Two men in particular break ranks: the ship's carpenter, James McGregor, and the assistant engineer, Ernest Gill. They are so haunted by what they witnessed that they completely bypass the ship's chain of command, which is a massive breach of protocol.
Huge deal back then.
They go ashore in Boston and leak the entire story to small New England newspapers like the Clinton Daily Item and the Boston American. Gill literally sells his sworn affidavit detailing how he saw the rockets, how he saw the ship, and how the Californian did absolutely nothing.
And once those stories hit the press, the public outrage is instantaneous and explosive. I mean, the U.S. Senate is already holding emergency inquiries into the disaster at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, and suddenly they realize there was a ship close enough to help that just sat there in the ice.
So they go after them.
They immediately issue subpoenas for Captain Lord and his crew, demanding they testify.
The inquiries are an absolute disaster for Captain Lord, and this is where we hit a detail that is incredibly suspicious. We have to talk about the mystery of the Californian's scrap log.
Yes. For those who don't know, a scrap log is the rough, unofficial notebook kept on the bridge of a ship. It's where the officers on watch jot down times, course headings, weather conditions, and any significant events in real time before they are neatly copied over into the official pristine ship's logbook the next day.
And when the investigators inevitably asked to see the scrap log for the night of April 14th to see exactly what Stone and Gibson wrote down about the White Rockets, it's gone.
Gone.
Destroyed.
Now, the parent company, International Mercantile Marine Company, had a standing corporate policy that scrap logs were supposed to be destroyed daily once the official log was updated.
Convenient.
Very. Because the official log that survived miraculously mentioned absolutely nothing about a nearby ship and nothing about distress rockets. It is highly convenient, to say the least. Second Officer Stone was asked repeatedly during the British inquiry what he actually wrote in that destroyed scrap log, but the exact phrasing was mysteriously lost to his memory.
Wait, hold on. We have to pause on this. Destroying the scrap log might have been standard company policy on a normal Tuesday, but doing it the morning after you watch the largest ship in the world sink right next to you, and then deliberately omitting the rockets from the official legal record.
It's terrible.
That is the 1912 equivalent of a CEO wiping a hard drive while the FBI is kicking down the front door. Does this point to an active, calculated cover-up engineered by Captain Lord to save his career and avoid criminal negligence, rather than just tragic incompetence?
It certainly looked that way to the investigators, and it's really hard to argue otherwise. Captain Lord's defense was a mess of shifting narratives and conflicting testimonies.
What did he say?
Well, when he first spoke to Boston newspapers, he claimed he was 30 miles away from the Titanic. A few days later, under oath, he reduced that to 20 miles. During the inquiries, he admitted he knew about the rockets, but stubbornly insisted they weren't distress rockets.
He stuck to the company signals thing.
Worse, he even concocted an elaborate theory that there was a third ship, a small, unidentified tramp steamer that was sitting exactly between the Californian and the Titanic, and that this phantom third ship was the one firing rockets and then steaming away before the Titanic sank.
But the U.S. Navy Hydrographer's Office completely dismantled that defense. They plotted the coordinates, the ice field, and the sight lines, and proved beyond a doubt that the Titanic and Californian were in direct sight of each other, and there was no evidence whatsoever of a third vessel.
None at all.
The verdicts from both the U.S. Senate inquiry and the British Wreck Commissioner's inquiry were devastating. They officially concluded that the ships were in sight of one another, that Captain Lord's inaction was reprehensible, and that the Californian could have saved many, if not all, of the lives lost.
Senator William Alden Smith, who ruthlessly led the U.S. inquiry, placed a tremendous responsibility squarely on Lord's shoulders. He stated that Lord's failure to simply wake the wireless operator to check the airwaves was completely inexcusable.
And his career was over?
Pretty much. Lord was branded a pariah by the public and the maritime community. He was quietly let go by the Leyland Line shortly after, and he spent the rest of his long life fighting a bitter, obsessive, and ultimately futile campaign to clear his name, constantly petitioning the government to reopen the case.
And for decades, the story remained a simple, infuriating morality play about an arrogant, cowardly captain who let people die. But then modern science stepped in and offered a terrifying twist to the story that forces us to reevaluate everything the crew actually saw that night.
This is where the narrative shifts from purely human failure to a freakish environmental anomaly.
Right.
In 1985, Dr. Robert Ballard and his team finally discovered the wreck of the Titanic on the ocean floor. But there was a massive problem with the location.
What was it?
The wreck was found 13 miles away from the SOS coordinates that the Titanic transmitted, the coordinates that were accepted as absolute fact by the 1912 inquiries.
Because of this new, irrefutable physical evidence regarding the ship's actual location, the UK Marine Accident Investigation Branch, the MAIB, officially reappraised the entire Californian incident in 1992.
And the MAIB reappraisal was actually quite divided, reflecting how complex this really is. Captain Barnett, the original investigator for the report, concluded the Californian definitely saw the Titanic and was much closer than Lord claimed.
Okay.
But the deputy chief inspector, James DeCoverley, argued that given the new coordinates, it was inconceivable they were in direct sight of each other, suggesting the Californian actually did see a third unidentified vessel.
Oh, wow. So Lord was right.
Well, ultimately, the 1992 report concluded a middle ground, that Lord's actions still fell far short of what was required, but conceded that because of the density of the pack ice, even if he had gathered immediately, the Californian likely wouldn't have arrived until well after the Titanic sank.
So they couldn't have saved the ship.
Right, they might have only been able to pull people from the lifeboats, much like the Carpathia did, rather than preventing the loss of life in the water.
But here is where it gets incredibly strange and honestly terrifying. A Titanic historian named Tim Malton put forward a theory that explains almost every bizarre discrepancy, every conflicting piece of testimony from that night.
Yes.
It's an atmospheric phenomenon called a cold water mirage or a superior mirage.
This is fascinating, deeply complex meteorology. A superior mirage occurs when you have a severe thermal inversion. On the night of April 14th, the freezing waters of the Labrador Current were pushing south, colliding directly with the much warmer air from the Gulf Stream.
Okay, so hot meets cold.
Exactly. This creates a scenario where a dense layer of freezing air is trapped right at the surface of the ocean, with a layer of much warmer, lighter air resting directly on top of it.
And this invisible layering of air acts like a giant atmospheric lens spanning the ocean. It physically bends light, it stretches and distorts the horizon.
Exactly. It's called superior refraction. The cold, dense air bends light rays downwards. It takes objects that are actually beyond the physical curve of the Earth, beyond the normal geometric horizon, and lifts their image up into the sky. It violently distorts their size and shape.
So, according to Malton's theory, this optical horror show explains why the Californian crew thought the Titanic looked queer.
Yes.
The mirage stretched the massive Titanic, visually compressing its decks and making it look like a small, oddly shaped freighter. It also explains why the Titanic's lookouts didn't see the iceberg until they were right on top of it. The thermal inversion created a false, raised horizon that completely camouflaged the ice in the dark.
It hid the ice.
Yeah, and those Morse lamps, the ones Groves and Stone were frantically flashing. The distorted atmosphere scattered the light, making the Californian's powerful electric Morse lamp look like a faint, flickering oil lamp to the Titanic's bridge.
The environment was literally scrambling their visual data. It was lying to them. It made the distress rockets look lower in the sky than they actually were, which directly contributed to Captain Lord's belief that they were just low-altitude company signals from a small nearby ship rather than high-altitude distress bursts from a distant Leviathan.
So I have to ask the ultimate question here. If the atmosphere itself was acting like a funhouse mirror, literally distorting reality to hide a dying ship in plain sight, does that absolve Captain Lord? Or does it just make this the ultimate maritime ghost story, where nature actively conspired to prevent a rescue?
It adds a layer of profound tragic irony. But no, it does not fully absolve him. Even if the ship looked weird, even if the rockets look low and strange, Gibson and Stone still recognized it as distress.
Right, they said it out loud.
They did. They still knew something was deeply wrong and communicated that fear. The mirage explains the visual confusion, but it doesn't excuse the sheer lack of curiosity. It doesn't excuse the failure to wake the radio operator to simply check the airways.
The environment played incredible lethal tricks on the Californian that night. But eventually the ocean would come to claim her too. And it happens in a strangely poetic, violently drawn-out finale.
The Californian didn't survive long after the Titanic. In 1913, she suffered a severe cargo fire while docked in Veracruz, Mexico, which heavily damaged her.
Okay.
By the time World War I broke out, the British government commandeered her for the war effort. They stripped her of her civilian status. They painted her in geometric dazzle camouflage to confuse enemy submarine rangefinders, and she became hired military transport ship, ferrying troops and equipment for the bloody Gallipoli campaign.
Fast forward to the morning of November 9th, 1915. The Californian is steaming through the eastern Mediterranean, escorted by a French torpedo boat. At 7:45 a.m., she is stalked and torpedoed by a German U-boat, the SMU-34.
A direct hit.
Yeah, the torpedo slams into her starboard side, amidships. Cargo holds 3 and 4, the boiler room, and the engine room instantly flood. One fireman, Richard John Harding, is killed in the blast. Captain William Masters orders the lifeboats launched, expecting the ship to go down rapidly.
But she doesn't.
No.
Despite massive catastrophic flooding that would sink almost any other ship, the Californian settles on an even keel. She stubbornly refuses to sink. The crew evacuates to the French patrol boat, watching their ship just sit there in the water, defying physics.
The French attempt to tow her, to drag her to port, but the tow line snaps under the immense dead weight. Hours pass. Then at 2:15 p.m., a second German submarine, the U-35, which, by the way, would go on to become the most successful U-boat in naval history, lines up a shot.
Wow.
They torpedo the Californian a second time, this time blowing a massive hole in her port side.
2 devastating torpedo strikes from 2 different submarines hours apart. It's almost unheard of. But still, the ship floats. Captain Masters actually believes they can still tow her all the way to Malta. She is crippled, gutted, but she will not go under.
But upon reaching Malta, the naval authorities decide the crippled, floating Californian is a hazard to navigation. So, 34 hours after the initial torpedo strike, the French patrol boat is ordered to execute her.
You have to put her down.
Exactly. They fire 2 salvos of heavy gunfire directly into her hull. Finally, the battered ship capsizes to port and sinks bow first into 13,000 feet of water.
And the dark irony of her final resting place is inescapable. She sinks less than 200 miles from where the Titanic's sister ship, the Britannic, would sink just a year later. To this day, unlike the Titanic, the wreck of the Californian remains completely undiscovered, lost in the deep.
You know, looking at the eerie parallels of this ship's life, the ship that sat motionless in the ice, watching the Titanic sink, absolutely refusing to move to help, later refused to sink herself when her own time came.
Yeah, it's wild.
She stubbornly clung to the surface to the point where her own allies had to violently put her down like a wounded animal. It is almost as if the very steel of the ship was burdened by the ghosts of April 14th, cursed to linger on the surface.
The story of the SS Californian is a harrowing blend of technological failure, severe environmental anomalies, and the devastating paralysis of human decision-making under pressure. She remains the ultimate, enduring symbol of the silent spectator.
It is so easy for us, sitting here over a century later in the comfort of hindsight, to judge Captain Lord, Stone, Gibson, and the rest of the crew for sitting in the dark watching those rockets and doing absolutely nothing. But when we are confronted with the inexplicable, when all the warning signs are flashing right in front of us, but our immediate reality feels safe and secure, how often do we convince ourselves that what we are seeing isn't a catastrophe, but just a trick of the light? The terrifying legacy of the Californian isn't just about a failed rescue at sea. It's a mirror asking us what we would do when we see distress signals on our own horizons.